of Guyana for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Deputy Special Coordinator Alak Barav, Deputy Emergency Relief Coordinator Masuya, and Ms. Ashing for your briefings. And thank you, Ilana Grudzuski, for your testimony today and your courage. It reminds us how this war began and why it persists. It is also a reminder that this Council and the United Nations as a whole have failed in their mission. They would do well to listen to voices like yours and learn from what you have been going through. Colleagues, the path to a better future in the Middle East is clear. It starts with freeing Matan and all 50 hostages who remain in captivity nearly 2 years after October 7th, 2023. It means ensuring that Hamas, a barbaric terrorist organization, never controls Gaza again, nor poses a security threat to Israel. The United States continues to work tirelessly to accomplish all those objectives while supporting humanitarian assistance to innocent people in need. We cannot expect peace as long as Hamas is a ruling force in Gaza that is threatening or attacking Israel. It is no coincidence that talks with Hamas fell apart after several countries, including members of this Council, announced their intention to effectively reward Hamas for the massacre by recognizing a Palestinian state, all while hostages are still being held in subhuman conditions. Hamas officials have even said that unilateral recognition is one of the fruits of October 7th. The United States continues to focus on the real and important tasks at hand, not conferences, but serious diplomatic efforts and providing humanitarian assistance in a war zone where a terrorist organization uses aid as the basis for its terrorist machine. Mr. President, we all recognize that hunger is a real issue in Gaza and that there are significant humanitarian needs which must be met. Addressing those needs is a priority for the United States. However, we can only solve problems with credibility and integrity. Unfortunately, the recent report from the IPC doesn't pass the test on either. One of the report's key authors has a lengthy record of bias against Israel, including openly justifying the Houthis' terrorist attacks on Israeli civilian targets. By his own measure, he ought to have recused himself. This helps explain why the normal standards were changed for this declaration, raising significant questions. We can spend no shortage of time pontificating and lecturing, but we are here to solve real problems affecting real people, and the only way to do that is with credibility and integrity. Colleagues, President Trump wants to alleviate the suffering the people in Gaza are experiencing at the hands of Hamas and has prioritized getting aid to people in need while implementing safeguards to prevent Hamas from looting. As of August 26th, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has delivered more than 140 million meals directly to civilians in Gaza, 1.5 million meals just today. UN data on the UN's own deliveries tells a different story. Between May 19th and August 25th of this year, over 85% of trucks and 62,000 pallets of aid were intercepted in transit in Gaza. The hard truth is that the international community has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into Gaza over the years, while turning a blind eye to the fact that it was subsidizing and facilitating Hamas's creation of a terrorist stronghold. Colleagues, we will also take this occasion to reject the falsehood that there is a policy of starvation in Gaza. Since the beginning of the war in Gaza, Israel has enabled an unprecedented amount of more than 2 million tons of aid to flow into the Gaza Strip. We are working closely with the government of Israel to increase the flow of aid without benefiting Hamas and are seeing tangible results. Instead of echoing false narratives which only embolden Hamas, prolong the war, and hurt civilians in Gaza, we urge the UN and the rest of this council to join us in working constructively to deliver aid to civilians that doesn't benefit Hamas. Rather than accept mass diversion of aid as a fait accompli, the United Nations, Council members, and IPC partners should support other mechanisms, including the GHF. We have also seen the Jordan corridor and the facilitation of commercial deliveries of food and other supplies into Gaza, and airdrops by Jordan, the UAE, and other international partners. The United States stands prepared to contribute toward real efforts that will supply life-saving aid to people on the ground in Gaza. Mr. President, we share the same dedication to the hostages underground, starved in tunnels, suffering through Hamas's captivity. Hamas must immediately free all remaining 50 hostages, living and deceased. The reality is that this war could end today if Hamas freed all the hostages and surrendered. We urge the UN Security Council and all members to play a constructive role, call for the immediate release of remaining hostages, hold Hamas to account, and demand it disarm and leave Gaza. Mr. President, we understand that Israel has expressed deep regret for harm to civilians and has already released findings from its investigation into the strikes on Nasser Hospital. The IDF concluded 6 Hamas members, one of whom had participated in the October 7th attacks, were killed when the IDF struck the site Hamas was using to monitor troops at the hospital. We note the prompt nature of this investigation and response and call on this council to condemn the continued use of civilian infrastructure by Hamas. We also acknowledge a stable West Bank keeps Israel secure and is in line with this administration's goal to achieve peace in the region. Finally, Mr. President, the United States welcomes the government of Lebanon's decision to task the Lebanese armed forces with a plan to bring all weapons under state control by the end of the year. This historic step shows the Trump administration continues to work toward peace and stability with our partners in the region. The Lebanese armed forces now must act to fully implement the government's decision. The United States will do its part to help forge a new reality in the Middle East alongside Israel and our partners. The Middle East can still be a region of opportunity, innovation, prosperity, and peace. We cannot miss this historic opportunity. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Deputy Special Coordinator Ramiz Alakbarov and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Musuya for their sobering briefings. I wish to thank Ms. Inga Ashin, Chief Executive Officer of Save the Children International, for shedding light on the deeply disturbing plight of the children in Gaza. To Ms. Ilana Gritsweski, I wish to express my deepest sympathy for the horrors you endure and commend your courage in sharing such a painful experience. Sierra Leone has consistently condemned the heinous attacks of October 7, 2023, as well as the taking of hostages by Hamas and other armed groups. We affirm our strongest condemnation of this act, which constitutes grave breaches of international law. Mr. President, for nearly 20 months of our 2-year tenure on this council, whenever convened to address the Gaza conflict, we've asked ourselves how the situation could possibly become more brutal and inhumane. Each time we're confronted with new depths of suffering. from the decades-long occupation and blockade of Palestinian territory to the heinous Hamas October 7 attack of 2023, to the ongoing plight of hostages and detainees, reported incidents of sexual violence, and now famine. The picture is one of mass atrocity crimes unfolding in real time. Distressingly, even international judges and prosecutors seeking accountability have faced threats and sanctions. Taken together, these elements point to credible indication of genocidal act and intent that cannot be ignored. On the dilemma of what more to say, we could today focus on recent atrocities, including the double strike on the Gaza Nasser Hospital. As a country that once benefited from regional and international solidarity through ECOWAS and the United Nations during our most difficult days, Sierra Leone feels a deep responsibility to speak plainly on behalf of the victims and to urge an end to the ongoing inhumanity and indignity. We therefore offer the following observations. First, amid this bleak picture, Sierra Leone wishes to commend the principal leadership of the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, and the work of the UN leadership and teams in the field. Throughout this crisis, the Secretary General has spoken with clarity and courage, affirming that every war has rules and calling out violations of international humanitarian law. He has reminded the world that the horrors of Gaza did not happen in a vacuum, while condemning in equal measure the heinous terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians. For this, he has faced vilification, yet his voice has been a moral compass in a time of deep division. Sierra Leone stands firmly in support of the Secretary General's continued calls for restraint, for compliance with international humanitarian law, and for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Second, what is unfolding in Gaza is not random. It is a systemic pattern of atrocity crimes. We note reports of indiscriminate and disproportionate bombardment in densely populated areas, the deliberate deprivation of food, water, medicine, and fuel, the razing of entire neighborhoods, attacks on hospitals, ambulances, and shelters, and the killing of journalists, medical workers, and aid staff. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Famine Review Committee has determined that famine is currently occurring in Gaza Governorate and that Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis Governorate are identified as most vulnerable in the coming weeks. This Gaza famine is not a natural disaster. It is man-made, the result of deliberate obstruction and denial of humanitarian assistance, as we've heard from Ms. Ashin. Under international law, genocide includes killing members of a group and inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Today in Gaza, we see undeniable warning signs of exactly such destruction being inflicted on a civilian population. The International Criminal Court has already issued arrest warrants that include the war crime of starvation. The International Court of Justice has ordered the government of Israel to take all measures to prevent genocide and to enable humanitarian relief. Yet the devastation continues, and the orders of the ICJ are openly disregarded. The pattern, regrettably, is not confined to Gaza. In the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, we see a parallel strategy: a surge in settler violence, the expansion of illegal settlement, and plans that threaten to sever territorial contiguity. Entire communities are being uprooted, with the clear effect of rendering life unviable for Palestinians and making the two-state solution increasingly unviable. Leone views this development with grave concerns. The parallels to ethnic cleansing are unmistakable. Third, we must also note the systematic assault on truth itself. As stated, the Secretary General has been subjected to campaigns of vilification simply for speaking the truth. The United Nations and its agencies have faced unsupported accusations. Even UN facilities, including schools and shelters, have been struck, undermining their essential humanitarian work. Journalists and media workers have paid with their lives in unprecedented numbers. News bureaus have been bombed, communications cut, and reporting stifled. Medical personnel, doctors, nurses, and paramedics have been attacked in clearly marked facilities and ambulances. Independent experts have described this as a war on healthcare. At the very least, these attacks amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. Silencing those who bear witness to suffering is an attack on truth and human dignity. Without truth, atrocity flourishes unchecked. We therefore call on all parties to respect the independence of the United Nations and ensure the safety of humanitarian actors, journalists, and medical workers. Mr. President, this council was created to respond to threats to international peace and security and to prevent the very horrors we are now witnessing. Yet, despite overwhelming evidence of atrocity crimes, our response has been disturbingly paralyzed. This echoes the darkest chapter of the 1990s, when the Council was rebuked for its failures during the genocides in Rwanda and Srebrenica. Then the world asked how the international community could stand by in silence. Today, the same question will be asked of us in our failure to act. The Genocide Convention obliged all states not only to punish, but also to prevent genocide. Inaction or paralysis in the face of clear warning signs is not neutrality. It is complicity. Inaction and indifference may equal complicity. Future generations will look back and ask whether this council did everything in its power to stop an atrocity in real time. History's judgment will be unforgiving if we fail to rise to this moment. The path forward is clear. We have listened carefully to the parties. From the state of Palestine, the calls are clear: an immediate ceasefire, renewed commitment to the Arab Peace Initiative, disarmament of Hamas, and a reinvigorated pursuit of a two-state solution. From Israel, we hear the imperative of freeing hostages, the need for security, and the desire to live in peace and normalization with Middle Eastern states. These objectives are not mutually exclusive. They are interdependent. A cessation of hostility is indispensable to save Palestinian lives and uphold their right, just as the release of hostages and security guarantees are indispensable for Israelis. There must be an immediate, comprehensive, and sustainable humanitarian ceasefire. There must be unfettered humanitarian access, with all crossings open for food, medicine, fuel, and water. There must be the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and humane treatment of all detainees. There must be an end to the collective punishment and attacks on civilians, hospitals, journalists, and UN facilities. There must be accountability for atrocity crimes to the support for the International Criminal Court and UN's investigative mechanisms. These councils will also consider measures, including restrictions on armed transfers, to halt the means by which atrocity crimes are being committed. The core purpose of the United Nations is to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights. In Gaza today, we face a moral test that will define our legacy. Never again was a vow made after the genocides of the last century, but it becomes meaningless if we turn away now. Sierra Leone's position is clear. We cannot be silent, we will not be complicit, and we will continue to raise our voice for the victims. Major General Henry Kwame Ayodoho, who served as Deputy Force Commander of the UN peacekeeping mission in Rwanda in 1994, once recalled that when confronted with a difficult choice, he said, and I quote, "We had to act according to the dictates of our conscience," end of quote. This is such a moment. For the sake of international law, for the sake of humanity, for the sake of the children who are starving as we speak, the time for action is now. I thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
President, I thank the briefers for their briefings. The Gaza conflict has persisted for nearly 700 days. Gaza has long become a living hell, with the 2 million Gazan people deeply trapped in a massive man-made catastrophe and over 1 million facing a food security emergency. The international community needs to exhaust every effort possible to prevent further deteriorations. China reiterates that violence cannot bring security, neither can force win peace. Israel's continued escalated military offensives have resulted in the loss of numerous innocent lives daily. Israel's strike on the Al-Nasser hospital on 25th of August killed over 20 civilians, journalists, and medical workers, creating yet another horrendous tragedy. Israel is still moving forward with its military plan to take over Gaza. The plan, once implemented, will inevitably lead to more bloodshed and displacement, adding to the danger and insecurity both Gazans and detained hostages are facing. China objects to and condemns all actions that harm civilians, damage infrastructure, and violate international law. We urge Israel to heed the strong calls from the international community, immediately cease its military operations in Gaza, and immediately halt any dangerous moves that escalate tensions. China further reiterates that violations of international humanitarian law are unacceptable, the weaponization of humanitarian supplies is unacceptable, and the militarization of an aid distribution mechanism is equally unacceptable. All along, the biggest challenge for scaling up humanitarian assistance in Gaza has not been the shortage of supplies or the inadequacies of the UN and other humanitarian agencies. Rather, it has always been the occupying power, Israel's lack of political will, and its deliberately created obstacles. We call on Israel to fulfill its obligations as an occupying power under the international humanitarian law by opening all border crossings, fully restoring humanitarian access, and supporting the UN's delivery of aid consistent with humanitarian principles to truly alleviate the humanitarian disaster on the ground. China reaffirms that the long unfulfilled aspiration for an independent Palestinian state is the fundamental reason preventing the solution to the Palestinian question and the root cause of the recurrent volatility of the Palestinian-Israeli situation. The Palestinian people's right to statehood, right to survival, and right to return must no longer be ignored. Israel's recent approval of a settlement expansion plan in the E1 area of the West Bank will severely undermine the contiguity of the Palestinian territory to the detriment of the foundation of a Palestinian statehood. The international community must build on the positive momentum of the two-state solution, reinvigorate the political prospect of the two-state solution with the utmost urgency, firmly reject any forced displacement of the Palestinian people, and oppose any dangerous attempts to annex the West Bank and Gaza. President, when peace is absent in the Middle East, peace is elusive for the world. At present, the Middle East situation is complex and fragile, with multiple intertwined hotspot issues. Amidst all this, however, the question of Palestine remains central to the Middle East issue. China supports the Council in taking all necessary actions to achieve a ceasefire, ending the fighting in Gaza, and alleviate the humanitarian disaster. We call on all countries, particularly the country with significant influence over the parties concerned, to uphold a just and responsible position and play a constructive part. China will continue to work with the international community towards ending the war in Gaza, advancing the implementation of the two-state solution, and ultimately achieving a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution of the Palestinian question so that both the Palestinian and Israeli peoples can live in shared tranquility and happiness. I thank you, President.
Agradecemos a la
I thank the representative of China for the statement, and I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are grateful to today's briefers for their information about the situation in the Gaza Strip. Over the past few days, we, just like many of our colleagues, were stunned by the new data on the record scale of famine in Gaza. These signals and persistent calls to Israel to immediately stop the collective punishment of the Palestinians have been forthcoming from different global capitals, including Moscow, and also international headquarters structures, regional